I was standing in my kitchen 3 weeks before my wedding when my father called and told me to postpone it. Not reschedule, postpone. His reason? My stepsister Courtney just got dumped, and seeing me happy would make her feel worse about her breakup. I stood there frozen, phone pressed to my ear, unable to process what I was hearing. My fiancée, Emma, looked at me with concern. Dad kept talking like this was reasonable, saying Courtney deserved consideration because she'd always been sensitive. That's when it hit me. 8 years. 8 years since he remarried, and had never once put me first. I hung up without saying another word. My hand was shaking. Emma touched my arm and asked what happened, and when I told her, her face went pale with shock and anger. She knew my father was difficult, but this crossed every line imaginable. I needed her to understand the full picture, so I started from the beginning. My mother died when I was 12 years old. Cancer. It took her in 6 brutal months, and my world shattered. For 4 years after that, it was just Dad and me. Those years were hard, but we were a team, or at least I thought we were. Then, when I was 16, Dad met Susan at a work conference. She was a widow with 2 daughters. Courtney was 14, and Melissa was 10. They got married fast, within 8 months. Suddenly I had a stepmother and 2 stepsisters, and my entire life changed overnight. From the very first day Susan moved in, I felt like a guest in my own home. Dad transformed into someone I didn't recognize. Every decision revolved around what Courtney wanted, what Melissa needed, how Susan felt. I became background noise. The memories came flooding back as I talked to Emma. My high school graduation. I'd worked incredibly hard, maintained a 3.9 grade point average, earned a partial scholarship to a good state university. It was supposed to be a proud moment, but Dad missed the ceremony because Courtney had a dance recital the same afternoon. Not a competition, not even a major performance, just a regular spring recital at her dance studio. When I asked him why he chose that over my graduation, he said Courtney had been practicing for weeks and would be devastated if no one showed up. I walked across that stage and saw Emma's parents cheering for me in the audience, but my own father's seat was empty. Then there was the college fund. My mother had been careful about money. Before she got sick, she'd started setting aside savings for my education. After she died, Dad promised me that money would cover my tuition. But when I was 17 and starting to apply to schools, Dad sat me down and explained that money was needed elsewhere. Courtney wanted a car for her 16th birthday. Not just any car, but a nearly new Honda Accord that cost $18,000. Dad used my college fund for the down payment and first year of insurance. He told me I was smart enough to get scholarships and loans. Courtney, he said, really needed reliable transportation for her activities. I took out $43,000 in student loans. I worked 2 part-time jobs throughout college. Meanwhile, Courtney got everything handed to her. New clothes, spending money, a sweet 16 party that cost more than my entire freshman year meal plan. Every family dinner became a showcase for Courtney's accomplishments and Melissa's activities. When I came home for Thanksgiving my freshman year and tried to share that I'd made the dean's list, Dad smiled briefly and then turned to Courtney to ask about her latest dance competition. The conversation never came back to me. I moved out when I was 18 and rarely came home after that. College was in another city, 3 hours away. I'd visit for major holidays, but each visit reinforced how little space there was for me in that house. My old bedroom had been converted into a craft room for Susan within 6 months of my leaving. When I mentioned it hurt to see my space erased, Dad said I was being overly sentimental and needed to accept that families evolve. Over the next 8 years, the distance between us grew, but I kept trying. I genuinely tried to maintain some kind of relationship with my father. I'd call him on his birthday, on Father's Day. I invited him to important events in my life. My college graduation, which he missed because Melissa had a volleyball tournament. My first apartment, which he never visited. The celebration dinner when I got my first real job after graduation, which he canceled 2 hours beforehand because Courtney was having a crisis about whether to accept a job offer or go to grad school and needed his advice immediately. Emma had witnessed this pattern throughout our 3-year relationship. She'd seen me make excuses for him over and over. Shed watched me get hurt repeatedly and then rationalize his behavior, always hoping things would somehow change, that my father would eventually see me again. But this wedding situation, shattered every last illusion I'd been clinging to. I looked at Emma and said I needed to call him back. She nodded, squeezing my hand for support. I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful like we'd been discussing weekend plans instead of him demanding I dismantle my wedding. Before I could say anything, he started talking. "Junior, I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. I already told Courtney you agreed to postpone, and she was so relieved and grateful. She's actually planning to come stay with you and Emma that weekend now. She needs to get away from everything here, and spending time with family will really help her heal. I told her you'd be happy to have her." My blood turned to ice. Had already told Courtney I agreed, without waiting for my actual answer, without any consideration for what I wanted, and now he expected me to host her the same weekend. Emma and I were supposed to be getting married. Had decided my life for me, just like Had been doing for 8 years. I exploded. 8 years of swallowed frustration came pouring out. I told him absolutely not. The wedding was happening exactly as planned, and he had no right to tell Courtney I'd agreed to anything. My voice was shaking with rage. Dad's tone changed instantly, going cold and hard. He said if I was going to be this selfish and inconsiderate, maybe he wouldn't attend the wedding at all. Maybe I needed to think about what kind of son refuses to make a small sacrifice for his sister's emotional well-being. I told him Courtney wasn't my sister. She was his stepdaughter, and her breakup had nothing to do with my wedding. I told him if he chose not to come, that was his decision, and I'd survive just fine without him. Then I hung up before he could respond. Emma wrapped her arms around me. I was shaking, adrenaline flooding my system. Part of me felt terrible, like I'd just done something unforgivable. The other part felt strangely liberated, like I'd finally said things that needed saying years ago. That feeling of liberation lasted about 2 hours. Then my phone started blowing up. First, Susan called. She was crying hysterically, saying I was breaking the family apart, that I'd always been difficult, but this was too much. She claimed Courtney was so distraught over her breakup that Susan was worried about her mental health, that having the wedding go forward would push Courtney over the edge. She actually used the word suicidal. I knew it was manipulation, classic emotional blackmail, but hearing it still made me feel sick. Then came a text from Melissa, the younger stepsister I'd barely spoken to in 5 years. Her message was short and vicious. She wrote that I'd always been the problem in the family, that I was jealous of Courtney and had been since day one, and that my selfishness was finally showing its true colors. She said their family was better off without me. Next was Uncle Frank, my dad's older brother. He called saying Had heard about the situation from my father, and while he understood I was excited about my wedding, I should really reconsider. Family harmony was important. Dad had been through so much raising me alone after my mother died. Didn't I owe him some consideration? Couldn't I just push the wedding back a month or two? That's when I realized what was happening. Dad had immediately launched a full-scale campaign, calling everyone in the family and spinning his version of events. He was painting himself as the reasonable father trying to keep everyone happy, and me as the ungrateful, selfish son who refused a simple request. Uncle Frank kept talking, and I stopped him mid-sentence. I asked him if Dad had mentioned that this simple request came 3 weeks before my wedding, if Dad had mentioned that deposits were non-refundable, that guests had made travel plans, that Emma and I had been planning this day for over a year, if Dad had mentioned that Had already told Courtney I agreed without even asking me first. There was a long silence. Uncle Frank said slowly that no, Dad hadn't mentioned those details. Dad had made it sound like the wedding was months away and I was just being stubborn. I thanked Uncle Frank for calling and said I needed to go. After I hung up, Emma's parents called. They'd heard about what was happening through the family grapevine and were outraged on my behalf. Emma's father, a straightforward man named David Hood, always treated me with more warmth than my own father, said Head. Be honored to walk me down the aisle if my dad didn't come. The offer made my throat tight with emotion. My best friend Tyler came over that evening. We'd been friends since middle school, and had witnessed my father's transformation after the remarriage. Tyler reminded me of all the times Dad had let me down, all the broken promises and missed moments. He said I deserved better and shouldn't feel guilty for standing up for myself. By the end of that first day, I was emotionally exhausted but also more certain than ever. I drafted a group text message to all the family members who'd contacted me. I kept it simple and clear. I wrote that the wedding would proceed as scheduled. Everyone was welcome to attend, but I wouldn't be discussing or debating the decision further. Anyone who wanted to come should RSVP. Anyone who didn't was free to decline. Then I sent it. I blocked Susan and Courtney's numbers because I couldn't handle any more manipulation, but I left Dad's number unblocked. Some small part of me still hoped He'd come to his senses and apologize. That He'd realize how badly He'd hurt me and try to make it right. That hope lasted 2 days. On the third day after the initial phone call, my cousin Derek called me. Derek was Uncle Frank's son, about my age, and we'd been close as kids. His voice was hesitant when I answered. He said he needed to tell me something, that he felt like I deserved to know. Dad and Susan were planning what they called a family intervention dinner. It was scheduled for the night before my wedding rehearsal dinner, and they'd invited my maternal grandparents, Uncle Frank, Derek, and several other cousins. The purpose was to pressure me into postponing the wedding. They were going to ambush me with family members, hoping group pressure would change my mind. But here was the worst part. They hadn't invited me. They were planning to show up at my rehearsal dinner location and stage their intervention there, in front of all my friends and Emma's family. Derek said He'd agreed to come before he understood what they were really planning. Now that he knew, he thought the whole thing was wrong. He wanted me to be prepared. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My father was willing to sabotage my rehearsal dinner. He was willing to humiliate me in front of everyone I cared about. He'd lied to extended family members to get them on his side. Derek told me something else. Dad had been spreading specific lies. He'd told people I'd uninvited Courtney from being a bridesmaid out of spite. The truth was, I'd never asked Courtney to be in the wedding party. We weren't close. Emma had her sister and 3 close friends as bridesmaids. Dad was in the original plan to walk me down the aisle. That was his only role. But He'd rewritten history to make me look cruel. He'd also told people I demanded he not bring Susan to the wedding, which was completely false. Susan was invited. Every family member was invited. It never excluded anyone. Dad had constructed an entire narrative where I was hostile and unreasonable, where I'd been pushing my stepfamily away for years, out of jealousy and resentment. He'd made himself the victim of my bad behavior. After I got off the phone with Derek, I sat in silence for several minutes, processing everything. Emma came home from work and found me staring at the wall. When I explained what Derek had told me, she looked furious. Then her expression changed to determination. She said we should go to the rehearsal dinner location early. We'd confront this head-on instead of letting Dad control the situation. We'd get there before them and be ready. I called my maternal grandparents next. Grandma Helen and Grandpa Robert had raised my mother, and they'd been devastated when she died. They'd always been loving toward me. But they lived 4 hours away in a small town and we didn't see each other as often as we should. Dad had told me they were invited to what he described as a family meeting before the wedding. They thought it was going to be a nice gathering. When I explained the truth, Grandma Helen's voice went hard in a way I'd rarely heard. She said they'd be at the rehearsal dinner early with me. Then she said something that changed everything. She asked if I knew about the life insurance money. I went quiet. She asked again, her voice tight. Did my father ever tell me about the life insurance payout after my mother died? I said no. I didn't know anything about life insurance. I knew Mom had some, but Dad never discussed it with me. Grandma Helen was silent for a long moment. Then she said my mother had a policy through her job, a substantial one. When she died, Dad received a payout of $300,000. The policy specified that the money was intended to secure my future, my education, my first home. Dad was supposed to put it in trust for me, or use it exclusively for my benefit. I couldn't breathe. $300,000. While I'd struggled through college with loans and 2 jobs. While I'd lived in a cramped studio apartment after graduation because I couldn't afford anything better. While I'd saved for 3 years, just to afford a modest wedding. Grandma Helen said she and Grandpa Robert had always wondered why I had such financial struggles in college. Dad had told them the life insurance money went into a college fund for me, but they'd noticed I was clearly working multiple jobs and taking out loans. They'd wanted to ask but didn't want to overstep. Now, knowing what Dad had done with my wedding, she was beginning to suspect the worst. She asked if I'd be willing to look into what happened to that money. If Dad had used it for other purposes, there might be legal recourse. I told her yes. Absolutely yes. The night of the rehearsal dinner arrived. Emma and I got to the venue an hour early, along with Emma's parents and her sister. My grandparents drove in and met us there, along with Tyler and a few other close friends who had warned about the potential drama. Sure enough, when we arrived, there were already cars in the parking lot. Through the window of a private room off the main dining area, I could see Dad, Susan, Uncle Frank, and about 8 other family members gathered around a table. They hadn't expected me to be there yet. I walked in with Emma holding my hand, my grandparents flanking me, and Tyler right behind us. The room went quiet when I opened the door. Dad's face cycled through shock, anger, and then a forced smile. He started to speak, something about how nice it was that we could all gather as a family before the big day. His tone was condescending, like he was talking to a child who'd wandered in during an adult conversation. I didn't let him get far. I'd spent 2 days preparing for this moment, and I was done with his manipulation. I said calmly that I understood they were planning an intervention to pressure me into postponing my wedding. I said I was aware Dad had been spreading lies about me to justify his unreasonable demands. I addressed the room, looking at each family member in turn, and told them the truth. I was never asked to postpone months in advance. The request came 3 weeks before the wedding. I never uninvited Courtney from being a bridesmaid because she was never asked to be one. I never demanded Dad not bring Susan. Every single claim Head made was false. Uncle Frank looked uncomfortable. A few cousins shifted in their seats. Dad tried to interrupt, tried to spin it, but I kept talking. I explained about the missed graduations, the college fund that went to Courtney's car, the 8 years of being invisible in my own family. Then Grandma Helen stood up. She's a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but in that moment she seemed immense. Her voice was steady and cold. She looked directly at Dad and asked what happened to her daughter's life insurance money. $300,000 that was meant for Junior's future. Where did it go? The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Susan's face drained of all color. Uncle Frank's eyes widened. Dad stammered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He finally said Head used it for family expenses, that raising 3 kids was expensive, that the money had gone toward household costs. Grandpa Robert spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. He said, "You mean you used our daughter's death money to buy Courtney a car, pay for her private dance classes, send your new family on vacations, and fund a lifestyle Junior was never part of, while he took on debt for an education that money was meant to cover?" Dad couldn't answer. His face went red, then pale. He looked trapped. Susan started crying, saying they'd needed the money, that Dad was supporting 4 people and Shed thought it was okay to use. She was trying to paint them as victims of circumstance, but the damage was done. Uncle Frank looked horrified, clearly realizing He'd been fed lies. Several cousins were openly staring at Dad with disgust. Derek wouldn't even look at his uncle, just shook his head slowly. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. The private room erupted. Susan's crying got louder, almost theatrical. She kept saying they needed the money, that they were just trying to take care of their family, that nobody understood how hard it was. Each word made me angrier because she was still trying to justify what they'd done. I stayed remarkably calm. 8 years of hurt had crystallized into perfect clarity. All the confusion and self-doubt I'd carried, wondering if I was too sensitive or ungrateful, evaporated. I saw my father and stepmother for exactly what they were. I looked at Dad and spoke slowly, making sure every word landed. "You stole my inheritance. You erased my mother's memory. You replaced me with a ready-made family the first chance you got. You're not my father anymore. Not in any way that matters." Dad's face twisted. He tried to recover, to spin the narrative back. Emma had been quiet up until that point, standing beside me with her hand in mine. But something in Dad's tone pushed her over the edge. She stepped forward, and her voice cut through the noise like a blade. She listed every major event in my life over the past 3 years that Dad had missed. My college graduation, where Id walked across the stage with honors. The celebration dinner when I got my first promotion at work. Our engagement party, which had RSVP'd to and then canceled the day before because Melissa needed help moving into a new apartment. The birthday dinners, the holidays where Head shown up late and left early, the phone calls Head promised to return and never did. Emma said, "A parent shows up. You never did. Not for Junior. You showed up for Courtney and Melissa, but your own son might as well have been invisible. That's not complicated. That's not pressure. That's a choice. You chose them over him. Every single time." Her words hung in the air. Several people were nodding. Susan tried to defend him, but even she seemed to realize how weak it sounded. I made my final statement. I told everyone in the room that the wedding was happening the next evening. They were all welcome to attend if they wanted to celebrate with us. But Dad was no longer invited. After what Head done, after the lies and the theft and the years of neglect, I didn't want him there. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and I refused to let him taint it. I asked the venue coordinator, who'd been hovering nervously near the door, to have security escort Dad and Susan out. Dad's face went purple with rage. Susan started shrieking that I was cruel and heartless, that I'd regret this, that I was throwing away my family over nothing. Security arrived quickly. 2 large men in dark suits appeared at the door. Dad tried to argue, but they were professional and firm. He and Susan were escorted out, Susan still wailing about how unfair everything was. That's when Courtney appeared. She'd apparently been in the bathroom during the entire confrontation and had missed everything. She walked into the room looking confused, her eyes red like she'd been crying. When she saw security escorting her mother out, she looked around frantically, trying to understand what happened. Someone quickly filled her in, and her face went through several emotions: shock, embarrassment, and then something that looked like shame. She stood there for a moment, then spoke quietly. "I never asked you to postpone your wedding. I didn't even know you were getting married until Dad told me yesterday. He said you'd offered to change the date for me, and I should be grateful." The room went silent again. This was yet another lie. Dad had fabricated Courtney's supposed devastation, her desperate need for the wedding to be postponed. Had used her as a prop in his manipulation without even telling her the truth. Courtney looked at me, and for the first time in 8 years, I saw something genuine in her expression. She said she barely knew me, that Susan had always made everything about her and Melissa's comfort, and she was starting to realize how messed up that was. She said she was sorry and then left quickly, following security out to find her mother. After they were gone, the energy in the room shifted completely. The remaining family members rallied around me. Grandma Helen hugged me tight and whispered that she was proud of me. Grandpa Robert shook my hand firmly and promised they'd help me get answers about the life insurance money. Uncle Frank approached me hesitantly and asked if we could talk privately sometime after the wedding. He wanted to understand how He'd been so blind, and he wanted to rebuild our relationship the right way. The planned intervention had backfired spectacularly. Instead of isolating me, it had exposed the truth and brought clarity to everyone present. We moved to the main dining area where the actual rehearsal dinner was supposed to take place. Emma's family and our friends had been waiting, aware something was happening but not sure what. When we explained, they were supportive and loving, exactly what I needed. The rehearsal dinner ended up being a strange but meaningful evening. It became less about practicing for the wedding and more about celebrating the fact that I'd finally stood up for myself. People shared stories, laughed, and created a warmth that had been missing from my family gatherings for years. That night, Emma and I got home around 11. I was exhausted, emotionally wrung out, but also feeling lighter than I had in years. I'd confronted the man who was supposed to protect me and had instead betrayed me. I'd spoken my truth, I'd set boundaries. At 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed, a voicemail from Dad. I almost deleted it without listening, but something made me press play. His voice came through the speaker, tight with anger. There was no apology, no reflection. Instead, he doubled down on everything. He said I'd always been jealous of Courtney, that my resentment had poisoned me. He said I was ungrateful for everything Head done for me after Mom died, that raising me alone for 4 years had been a sacrifice I'd never appreciated. He said I was making the biggest mistake of my life by cutting off my family, that I'd regret this when I was older and realized what I'd thrown away. The voicemail ended with a threat disguised as concern. When you come crawling back, and you will, don't expect me to forgive you easily. You've burned bridges that can't be rebuilt. Think about that before you go through with this wedding. I saved the voicemail, not because I wanted to listen to it again, but because it was evidence. Evidence of his mindset, his manipulation, his complete inability to take responsibility. That message confirmed what I'd suspected but hadn't fully accepted until that moment. My father would never change. He would never admit fault. He would never be the parent I needed him to be. And strangely, that realization brought peace. I wasn't hoping anymore. I wasn't waiting for him to suddenly become different. I could finally let go. I woke up on my wedding day feeling nervous energy mixed with absolute certainty. Despite everything that had happened, or maybe because of it, I knew I was making the right choice in marrying Emma. Shed stood beside me through the worst family drama imaginable, never wavering. The morning was busy with final preparations. My groomsmen, led by Tyler, picked me up and took me to breakfast. They kept the mood light, telling stupid jokes and reminiscing about college. It was exactly what I needed. When we got to the venue around noon to start getting ready, David, Emma's father, pulled me aside. As a quiet man, thoughtful and steady, he put his hand on my shoulder and said if I wanted someone to walk me down the aisle with me, he'd be honored to do it. The offer made my eyes sting with unexpected emotion. I thanked him and said I'd think about it. Guests started arriving around 4. The ceremony was scheduled for 5. I stood in the groom's ready room, adjusting my tie for the 10th time, when Tyler poked his head in and said someone was asking to see me. My stomach dropped. I thought maybe Dad had shown up to cause a scene, but Tyler's expression was neutral, not alarmed. He said it was Courtney. She was standing in the hallway outside the room, wearing a simple blue dress, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. When she saw me, she immediately said she'd understand if I wanted her to leave. She knew she wasn't invited to the wedding party, but she wanted to attend if that was okay. I was genuinely surprised. After the blow-up last night, I hadn't expected to see her again. She spoke quickly, like she needed to get the words out before she lost courage. She said she'd been in therapy for the past 2 months, actually dealing with her breakup and some other issues. Last night's confrontation had shaken her. She'd gone home and really looked at how her mother and my father had behaved. She saw the manipulation clearly for the first time. She was starting to understand how toxic the family dynamics had been and how blind she'd been to my experience. She said she was sorry, not just for last night, but for the past 8 years, for benefiting from a situation that hurt me, for never questioning why I was never around, for accepting the narrative that I was the problem. I appreciated her honesty. I told her she could stay for the ceremony if she wanted, but I asked her to sit toward the back and keep a low profile. This wasn't about punishing her. I just didn't want any drama on my wedding day. She agreed immediately, thanked me, and disappeared down the hallway. The ceremony started right on time. The venue was beautiful, decorated exactly as Emma and I had envisioned. White flowers everywhere, soft lighting, about 80 guests filling the chairs. I'd decided to walk myself down the aisle. It felt right, symbolic of standing on my own. But as I stood at the altar waiting for Emma to appear, David caught my eye from the front row and nodded at me with so much warmth that I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Emma's family had welcomed me completely. Then the music changed, and Emma appeared at the back of the aisle. She was breathtaking. Her dress was elegant and simple, her face glowing with happiness. As she walked toward me, accompanied by her father, I felt every painful moment of the past week fade away. This, right here, was what mattered. The ceremony itself was perfect. We'd written our own vows. When it was my turn to speak, I mentioned my mother briefly, saying I knew she was with us in spirit and would have loved Emma. My voice cracked a little, but I got through it. I talked about building a future based on showing up for each other, on being true partners, on creating a family defined by love and presence, not obligation. Emma's vows made me cry. She talked about my strength, my resilience, my capacity for forgiveness and growth. She said she was honored to be building a life with someone who knew what mattered. When we kissed and turned to face our guests as husband and wife, the applause was thunderous. Walking back down that aisle with Emma's hand in mine, I scanned the crowd. Conspicuously absent were Dad, Susan, and Melissa, but Courtney was there in the back row, clapping with tears running down her face. My grandparents were in the front, beaming. Uncle Frank gave me a thumbs up. Tyler was grinning like an idiot. The reception was pure joy. No drama, no tension, just celebration. The food was excellent, the music was perfect, and the speeches were heartfelt. Uncle Frank spoke during the family toasts, publicly apologizing for doubting me and praising Emma for her loyalty. It meant more than he probably knew. Tyler's best man speech was a perfect mix of humor and sincerity. He told embarrassing stories from our teenage years, then talked about watching me grow into a man of integrity despite difficult circumstances. He raised his glass and said, "To Junior, who proves every day that family is what you make it, not what you're born into." David, Emma's father, gave a speech that absolutely destroyed me emotionally in the best way. He talked about gaining a son, about how Emma had chosen well, about how their family was proud to welcome me. He said, "We're honored to have a son like you. You've shown remarkable character, and we're grateful Emma found you." I felt a belonging I hadn't experienced in years. This was family. These people who showed up, who celebrated with us, who supported us through chaos. Late in the reception, around 9 at night, I noticed Courtney getting ready to leave. I excused myself from a conversation and caught up with her near the exit. She seemed surprised that Id followed her. I thanked her for coming. I told her it meant something that Shed acknowledged the truth, even if it was difficult. She nodded, looking uncomfortable but genuine. She said she was sorry Shed been blind for so long, that I deserved better from all of them. I told her I hoped Shed find her own path forward. We wouldn't be close. Too much had happened, and we didn't really know each other. But it was acknowledgement, and that was enough. The night ended perfectly. Emma and I left around 11, exhausted and happy, heading to a hotel near the airport for a few hours of sleep before our early morning flight. As we drove away from the venue, I looked back at the glowing windows and felt complete peace. I'd done it. I'd stood up for myself. I'd married the love of my life, and I'd surrounded myself with people who actually valued me. The next morning, we were waiting at the airport gate for our flight to a small Caribbean island for our honeymoon when I checked my email. There was a message from a law office I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Ray, estate of Margaret Ann Hayes, life insurance proceeds." My mother's name, Margaret Ann Hayes. I opened it with shaking hands. The email was from a lawyer named Patricia Fernandez. She explained that my maternal grandparents had contacted her office regarding potential misappropriation of life insurance funds. She'd done a preliminary investigation and found documentation that was concerning. There was a paper trail. Dad had received a payout of $300,000 from my mother's life insurance policy 10 months after her death. The policy documents clearly stated the funds were intended for my benefit as the minor child. Dad, as my surviving parent, was the trustee of those funds until I turned 25, but the money had never been put in trust. Instead, Dad had deposited it into a joint checking account with Susan within 2 months of their marriage. Over the following 5 years, the money had been systematically spent. The lawyer had found records of major purchases: Courtney's $18,000 car, a $50,000 kitchen renovation, family vacations including a $23,000 trip to Europe that I'd never been invited on, Melissa's orthodontic work that cost $12,000, and numerous other expenses that benefited Dad's new family but never me. Patricia wrote that this appeared to be a clear case of breach of fiduciary duty. She believed I had grounds for a lawsuit to recover the misappropriated funds plus interest and potentially damages. The current value, with interest calculated over 8 years, would be approximately $417,000. She wanted to schedule a consultation when I returned from my honeymoon to discuss options. I showed Emma the email. She read it, her expression hardening with anger on my behalf. Then she hugged me tight and said, "Hez going to face consequences." Finally, As our flight boarded and we headed toward a week of peace and celebration, I felt something shift inside me. Justice was actually possible. My father had stolen from me, lied to me, replaced me, and now he was going to have to answer for it. Emma and I had a beautiful honeymoon. 5 days on a quiet island, away from phones and email and family drama. We snorkeled, ate incredible food, slept late, and just existed together. It was healing in ways I didn't know I needed. But when we got home, reality was waiting. There were 17 missed calls from various family members and a certified letter from Dad's lawyer. The letter was exactly what I expected. It threatened me with a defamation lawsuit if I continued to spread false and malicious claims about his use of my mother's life insurance money. It called my accusations baseless and harmful, and demanded I immediately cease discussing the matter with anyone. I forwarded the letter to Patricia Fernandez, my lawyer. She called me within an hour, laughing. She said threatening letters like this were common when someone got caught doing something indefensible. It was intimidation, nothing more. Dad's lawyer knew the evidence was damning. Patricia had been busy during the week I was gone. Shed subpoenaed bank records, obtained the original life insurance policy documents, and built a timeline of exactly how the money had been spent. The case was even stronger than Shed initially thought. She showed me everything during our consultation. The policy was crystal clear. My mother had specifically designated the funds for my education, future housing costs, and overall welfare. Dad was named as trustee, but the money was legally meant for me. By depositing it into a joint account with Susan and spending it on household expenses and his stepchildren, Head violated his fiduciary duty. The paper trail was devastating. Within 6 months of depositing the insurance money, Dad had purchased Courtney's car. The dealership records showed his signature, and the payment came from the account containing my mother's life insurance funds. A year later, Susan's name was added to the deed of Dad's house, using money from the same account for closing costs. The European vacation had been booked and paid for using that account while I was working 2 jobs to afford textbooks. Patricia recommended we file a civil lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of funds, and fraud. She believed we could recover the original amount plus interest, and potentially additional damages for emotional distress. Within 2 weeks, the lawsuit was filed. Dad's lawyer immediately contacted Patricia trying to negotiate a settlement. The opening offer was insulting. $50,000 in exchange for me dropping all claims and signing a non-disclosure agreement. I was insulted. The original amount with interest was over $400,000. Dad wanted to pay me $50,000 and buy my silence. Patricia advised me to reject the offer, and I did without hesitation. Depositions began a month later. The legal process moved faster than I expected because the evidence was so clear-cut. Dad tried to claim the money had gone to household expenses that benefited me too, but the records showed otherwise. During the years he was spending my mother's life insurance money, I was living in a college dorm, surviving on ramen noodles and student loan funds. Susan's deposition was apparently a disaster. According to Patricia, she'd been evasive and contradictory, first claiming she didn't know where the money came from, then admitting she knew it was life insurance but thought it was okay to use for family needs. When confronted with specific purchases like Courtney's car, she broke down crying and said they'd just been trying to give the girls a good life. The discovery process revealed even more. Some of the life insurance money had been used to purchase a small rental property, and that property was in Courtney's name. Dad had literally converted my inheritance into an asset for my stepsister. The rental property was now worth about $90,000 and generated monthly income. Dad had also used $35,000 of the insurance money to pay off his own credit card debt from before he even remarried. Had essentially stolen from his dead wife's son to clean up his own financial mess. As all of this came to light, extended family members reached out with apologies. People who'd believed Dad's version of events were horrified when they learned the truth. Some relationships were rebuilt. My cousin Ashley and I started having regular phone calls. Uncle Frank took me to lunch and spent 2 hours apologizing and trying to understand how Head missed the signs. But not everyone came around. Melissa, the younger stepsister, sent me a long, angry email defending our parents. She said I was being vindictive, that families were supposed to forgive each other, that I was destroying Dad and Susan's lives over money. Dad had also used $35,000 of the insurance money to pay off his own credit card debt from before he even remarried. Had essentially stolen from his dead wife's son to clean up his own financial mess. As all of this came to light, extended family members reached out with apologies. People who'd believed Dad's version of events were horrified when they learned the truth. Some relationships were rebuilt. My cousin Ashley and I started having regular phone calls. Uncle Frank took me to lunch and spent 2 hours apologizing and trying to understand how Head missed the signs. But not everyone came around. Melissa, the younger stepsister, sent me a long, angry email defending our parents. She said I was being vindictive, that families were supposed to forgive each other, that I was destroying Dad and Susan's lives over money. Courtney said she was trying to build her own life, independent of their dysfunction. Shed started paying rent on her own apartment, covering her own expenses. Shed even looked into what would happen to the rental property in her name if I won the lawsuit. She said if the court determined it should be mine, she wouldn't fight it. She hadn't asked for it in the first place. I appreciated her honesty. I told her I didn't blame her personally for what Dad and Susan had done. She'd been a kid when most of it happened. But I also told her I didn't think we'd be close. Too much history, too much pain. She understood. Over the next few months, my life stabilized in wonderful ways. Emma and I found a small house we loved and made an offer. My career was going well, with a promotion and raise that gave us more financial breathing room. We were building something real and solid together. The lawsuit negotiations continued. Dad's second offer was $125,000. Still insulting. Patricia advised that if we went to trial, we'd likely win significantly more. I told her to prepare for trial. I wanted him to face full accountability. The third offer came right before the trial date. $275,000, paid over 3 years in structured payments, plus the rental property in Courtney's name would be transferred to me. In exchange, he'd agree not to pursue additional damages for emotional distress. Patricia said it was a reasonable offer. Trial was expensive and uncertain, even with strong evidence. The settlement would give me substantial funds to build my life, recover most of what was stolen, and close this chapter. I agreed to the settlement. It wasn't everything, but it was justice. Real, tangible justice. The day I signed the settlement papers, I felt closure. Not happiness exactly, but resolution. My father was being held accountable. The money that should have been mine was finally coming back to me. I could move forward. 2 days after the settlement was finalized, Dad showed up at my workplace. Security called me before letting him into the building. I could have had them turn him away, but something made me agree to meet him in the lobby. He looked terrible, haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled, and had lost weight. When he saw me, he started talking immediately, his words tumbling over each other. He begged me to drop the settlement, claimed it would bankrupt him and Susan, that they'd lose their house if they had to pay me. He played the victim again, saying I was destroying his life over ancient history. He said the money was spent years ago, it was gone. Making him pay it back now was cruel and vindictive. I let him talk himself out. Then I spoke, my voice calm and steady. I'd practiced these words in my head for weeks. You had 8 years to be my father. You chose Susan's daughters instead. You had 3 weeks before my wedding to apologize. You chose to lie and manipulate. You had a month after the wedding to make things right. You chose to leave a voicemail blaming me for everything. This isn't revenge. This is accountability. Mom would have wanted her money to help me build my life, and that's exactly what's happening now. Dad's face twisted with rage. The mask of victimhood slipped, and I saw his true self underneath. His voice went cold and hard. Your mother would be ashamed of the vindictive, heartless person you've become. Shed, be disgusted. Something inside me that had been holding on to hope finally let go. My father didn't love me the way a father should. Maybe he never had. Maybe he was incapable of it. But either way, I didn't need him anymore. I turned and walked away without another word. Security escorted him out of the building. I went back to my office, closed the door, and sat quietly for a few minutes. It was over. Truly, over. I would never see him again. And I was okay with that. 6 months passed. 6 months of building a life that felt genuinely mine for the first time. Emma and I closed on our house, a 3-bedroom ranch, in a quiet neighborhood with good schools. We used part of the first settlement payment for the down payment and still had money left for furnishing it the way we wanted. No hand-me-downs, no making do. We chose everything together. The house had a backyard, which was important to both of us. We wanted space for future kids to play, for summer barbecues, for a garden. It felt like a real beginning. Id started having weekly dinners with Grandma Helen and Grandpa Robert. Every Sunday, I'd drive out to their place or they'd come to us. We'd cook together and spend hours talking. They shared stories about my mother, memories I'd never heard. I learned Shed been stubborn and fiercely loyal, that Shed had a sarcastic sense of humor, that Shed loved old movies and hated mornings. These dinners became sacred to me. Through them, I felt connected to Mom in a way I hadn't since she died. Dad had essentially erased her from the house after Susan moved in, putting away photos and avoiding talking about her. Grandma and Grandpa gave her back to me through their stories. Courtney visited occasionally. Our relationship would never be sisterly, but there was mutual respect. Shed continued therapy and was working on establishing her own identity separate from Susan and Dad. Shed gone back to school to finish a degree Shed abandoned years ago. She was trying, and I appreciated that. Id reconnected with Uncle Frank, too. Had been genuinely horrified by what Dad had done and was working to repair our relationship. It would take time, but I was open to it. Head owned his mistakes and was showing up differently now. Emma's family had fully embraced me as one of their own. Her parents included me in all family events. Her siblings treated me like a brother. It gained a family by marriage that was healthier and more functional than the one it'd been born into. At work, I received another promotion. The stability in my personal life had allowed me to focus and excel professionally. I was building a career I was proud of, working with people I respected. The rental property that had been in Courtney's name was officially transferred to me. I decided to keep it as an investment. The monthly rental income would go toward saving for my future kids' college funds. The irony wasn't lost on me. Money that Dad had stolen from my education fund would now fund my children's education. Then, in early spring, Emma told me she was pregnant. We'd been trying for a few months, hoping but not expecting it to happen quickly. When she showed me the positive test, I completely broke down. Happy tears, overwhelming joy mixed with terror and determination. I was going to be a father, and I was going to be the father my dad never was. That night, I wrote a letter to my unborn child. I poured everything into it, all my promises and hopes. I promised to always show up, to prioritize them, to make them feel valued and seen, to protect them but also let them grow, to be present for the big moments and the small ones, to never make them compete for my attention or love, to be honest about my mistakes and always try to do better. I included a photo of my mother in the letter, telling my child about the grandmother they'd never meet but who would have loved them fiercely. I wanted them to know where they came from, the good and the difficult parts. On what would have been Mom's 53rd birthday, Emma and I planted a tree in our backyard, a Japanese maple with delicate red leaves. We stood there together, my hand on Emma's still flat belly, and I felt my mother's presence stronger than I had in years. I imagined her proud of the man I'd become, the family I was building, the courage it took to walk away from toxicity. I'd been in therapy throughout these months, processing everything. My therapist helped me understand that cutting off my father wasn't cruelty. It was self-preservation. That loyalty to family doesn't mean accepting mistreatment, that I had the right to protect my peace. I learned that I couldn't force someone to value me. My father had made his choices consistently for 8 years. I'd made excuses for him, hoped he'd change, bent myself into shapes trying to earn his love. But his inability to see me, to prioritize me, to treat me with basic decency wasn't my failure. It was his. Therapy helped me grieve the father I'd needed but never had. I'd been mourning that loss for years without realizing it. Acknowledging the grief allowed me to finally move past it. I was learning that real family, the family that matters, is chosen through actions. It's the people who show up, who keep their promises, who celebrate your successes and support you through failures, who see you and value you consistently. By that definition, I was surrounded by family. Emma and her parents and siblings, My grandparents, Tyler, and a few close friends who'd stuck with me through everything. Uncle Frank, slowly earning his way back. Even Courtney, in her limited way, showing up differently than before. As Emma's pregnancy progressed and we started preparing the nursery, I felt profound peace. I was building something my father never could, a home based on love and presence, not obligation and control. The settlement payments continued coming quarterly. We were smart with the money, investing most of it, using some for the house and necessities. That money, my mother's gift to me that had been stolen and was now returned, was securing our future. I thought about my father sometimes, wondered how he was doing, but I didn't reach out. I didn't need to know. Head made his bed, and whatever he was lying in now was a consequence of his own choices. I hoped Head learned something, but I didn't expect it. Some people never change. What mattered was that I had changed. Id found my voice. Id set boundaries. Id protected my future and my family. Id chosen myself when everyone else expected me to sacrifice for their comfort. Standing in our backyard one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, Emma beside me with her hand resting on her growing belly, I understood something fundamental. My father had taught me what not to be. In his neglect and betrayal, had shown me exactly the kind of man I refused to become. And in that painful, backwards way, maybe that was the greatest lesson he could have given me. I learned that you can't force someone to value you, but you can decide to value yourself. You can recognize when a relationship is poison and have the courage to walk away. You can build a new family, a chosen family, that reflects your values. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is close a door that should have been closed years ago. It's not about hate or revenge. It's about loving yourself enough to demand better, to protect your peace, to refuse crumbs when you deserve a feast. My father taught me what not to be. He showed me exactly how a parent can fail, how love can be conditional, how family can be weaponized. And from that painful education, I built something different, something better. A life based on showing up, keeping promises, valuing the people who value me. As I stood there with my hand joining Emma's on her belly, feeling the first tiny flutters of movement from our child, I made a silent promise. This baby would never question my love, would never compete for my attention, would never feel invisible in their own home. I would be present, engaged, committed, not perfect, but present. That's the life lesson I carry forward. That's the gift hidden in all the pain. My father's failures taught me how to succeed as a man, a husband, and soon, a father. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the worst teachers. I'm at peace now, truly at peace. The door is closed, but so many new doors have opened. I have a wife who stands beside me through everything, a child on the way, a home we built together, a future full of possibility. Family, real family, chosen and earned through love and presence. That's enough, more than enough. It's everything. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member to protect your own well-being? How did you find the strength to set those boundaries? And what did you learn from it? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who's struggling with a similar situation. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories about resilience, family, and finding your way through difficult times. Share this with someone who might need to hear it, someone who's struggling to set boundaries or walk away from toxicity. Sometimes we all need a reminder that choosing ourselves isn't selfish. It's survival. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it brought you some insight or comfort, or maybe just the permission to put yourself first when you need to. Take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and remember that family is what you make it, not what you're born into. Until next time.